Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 25th in the VCCA Fireplace series. I am your host. My name is Isaac Rahamim, and today we are very fortunate to have two wonderful writers with us, Carter Sickles and Stephen Petro. A little bit about the series. The Virginia Center for Creative Art is a wonderful residency organization where fellows actually go and stay at the location for a period. And one of the things that happens, and the fellows are artists, writers, musicians, visual artists, and so forth. And one of the things that happens is once or twice a week, the fellows get together. And very often it's actually in a living room where there's a fireplace. And so the writers get to read from what they're working on, or to their fellows. Composers perhaps could play some of their music. And for the visual artists, we sort of, after dinner, we usually go to their studios so that we can look at some sampling of what they're looking at. Of course, with COVID, we could not do this. The residency was closed. So VCCA started this Fireplace series, and we are on the 25th one. Fortunately, recently VCCA again opened up. So in fact, we have some fellows resident, but we are still continuing with the series so that a larger audience can actually participate and listen to some of the wonderful work the writers and artists are doing. Our producer is Kim Doty, who's in the background, sort of will keep us straight and make sure everything will go smoothly. The process will be, I will introduce our two writers, tell you a little bit about each one of them, and then invite each one to read from their most recent book for about 8 to 10 minutes. And then after that, we'll open it up to questions. And you will see on the right of your screen, there's a comment section. Please feel free to put down your comments and your questions, and I will pose the questions to our two writers, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion. So let me start by introducing our first writer. Carter Sickles is the author of the novel The Prettiest Star, published by Hub City Press, which won the 2021 Southern Book Prize and the Weatherford Award, and was selected as a Kirkus Best Book of 2020 and a Best LGBT Book of 2020 by O Magazine. His debut novel, The Evening Star, was a 2013 Oregon Book Award finalist and a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and was adapted into a feature film that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival last year. His writing appears in various publications, including The Atlantic, Oxford American, Poets and Writers, BuzzFeed, Guernica, Joyland, and Catapult. He is a 2021 recipient of the Stephen Petro LGBTQ Fellowship, established in 2016 to support residencies at the VCCA for writers, visual artists, and composers who self-identify as LGBTQ. Carter will read from his novel, The Prettiest Star, which examines the AIDS crisis of the 1980s through the lens of rural America. He worked on the novel at two previous VCCA residencies in 2014 and 2015. Our second guest today is Stephen Petro. He's an award-winning journalist and a book author who's best known for his Washington Post and New York Times essays on aging, health, and civility. He's the author of multiple books, including Stupid Things I Won't Do When I'm Old and Stephen Petro's Complete Gay and Lesbian Manners. His 2019 TED Talk, 3 Ways to Practice Civility, has more than 1.6 million views. Stephen's work has been published in Time, The Atlantic, The Daily Beast, the Los Angeles Times, and USA Today. Much of his work over the past decade has taken place at VCCA, and he is currently serving as a member of the board of directors. Previously, Stephen was the president of NLGJA, which is the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association. He lives in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Stephen's new book, Stupid Things I Won't Do When I Get Old, which you will read from for us, is part memoir and part manifesto about aging. Dr. Andrew Weil applauded this book, saying that Petro's book will help you plan, think, and redefine what it means to get older, and even laugh while doing it. Much of the book was written at VCCA. Welcome, gentlemen. And I would like to invite Carter Sickles to perhaps tell us a bit about his book and read a bit from his book. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Isaac, and thank you to Kim and to BCCA, and of course it's an honor to read with Stephen, and I'm very excited to hear you read. And I'm actually at VCCA right now. I just got here on Monday, so I'm really just so grateful to be back here. And I'll read a little bit from my novel, The Prettiest Star, and it came out in 2020, and the paperback just came out in May 21. And the novel is about Brian Jackson, who is a young gay man who's been diagnosed with HIV and living in New York since he was 18. And he's lost his boyfriend and many of his friends and lovers to AIDS. And he decides to go back to the small town where he grew up in Ohio, in Appalachia. And his parents, tell him he can come back home, but they want to keep his sexuality and his HIV status secret. And that secrecy and shame really weighs on Brian and sort of tears the family apart as rumors start to spread in the town. So the novel uses multiple narrators, and I'm going to read first from Jess's point of view. And Jess is Brian's 14-year-old sister, and she hasn't seen her brother since she was about 8 years old. And she doesn't know why he left or why he's come back. And the only other thing you need to know about her is that she has kind of an obsession with whales. So this is her, at the end of her first chapter, when Brian just comes back home. Killer whales use echolocation to communicate. They call out, and the time an echo takes to come back to them tells them how far away an object is. The echoes help them to navigate and hunt and find each other. Echolocation is like a sixth sense. When I was little, I used to think that Brian and I could communicate telepathically, like the brother and sister in the movie Escape to Witch Mountain. I believed I could send him my thoughts like whale signals, and he would hear them. I was just a dumb kid. At night, after I said my prayers, I would close my eyes and listen to the pulsing of the dark, but I never heard any voice, never received any message. I'm in my room with the door cracked, Duran Duran on the boombox, volume turned low, so I can still hear my mother moving around in the kitchen, putting away dishes, making herself a cup of hot tea. My father is out in the garage. We're hiding from each other, waiting. The house smells like the pot roast we had for supper, hot, soft potatoes melting between my teeth, stringy beef like veins. I could only eat a few bites. A muffler rumbles underneath the music, Gus's truck. I thought we'd all go to meet Brian at the bus stop, but my mother and Brian said Brian didn't want a big to-do. From downstairs, Sadie barks. I count to 3, and then I go. I'm the first one at the door. I stand still, watch the knob turn, like I'm one of those dumb girls in a horror movie, stuck in my tracks. Sadie is barking, wagging her tail. Gus steps in first. Rain trickles down the bill of his Chester Eagles hat and slides down his jacket. He wipes his boots on the welcome mat. He is carrying a big lime green duffel bag. Hey, Jess, he says. The door swings wider and a man walks in, his face shadowed by a blue hooded sweatshirt. He's wearing a jean jacket and black jeans and Nikes with a red swoosh. He pulls down the hood. For a second, I don't think it's him. He's skinnier than I remember and looks old, a grown-up. His hair isn't as blonde as it used to be. He wears it short on the sides and on top, longer in the back. His teeth are the color of tobacco juice, and his raggedy lips look dry and chapped. Stubble on his chin. He reminds me of the pictures I've seen of drug addicts. Maybe he's a junkie. Jess, he says, and his voice is the same. It's deja vu hearing him talk. You've gotten so old. What are you, like 30 now? 14, I say. He sets down a small suitcase and stands close enough to hug me, but doesn't. Keeps his bony hands at his side, and I don't make a move toward him either. I don't know him and feel shy. Sadie whines at his feet, pushes her muzzle into his legs, and he crouches down and digs his knobby fingers into her fur. You got old too, Sadie, Brian says. When he stands, I see a little gold hoop in his right ear, delicate, the shape of a fingernail. I can't remember which is the bad one to have pierced, right or left, gay or straight. The air shifts, thins out. It isn't just the three of us anymore. My father moves slowly up the stairs, and my mother comes out of the kitchen. They stand next to me, about 3 feet from Brian. Big Gus tries to scrunch himself into the corner of the doorway, tucking his fat chin like he doesn't want anyone to see him. You must be hungry, my mother says. Run into any flooding? Asks my father. 6 years he's been gone, and this is how they greet him, like he just went out to the store for cigarettes. We crowd in close, no one touching. My father looks at the grease rag in his hand like he has no idea how it got there, and balls it up and stuffs it in his hip pocket. Glad you made it okay, he says. He takes a step forward, standing a head taller than Brian, and clamps his hand on Brian's shoulder. Just as quickly as he touches him, my father reaches his hand back, but it's enough. Him touching Brian like that seems to break something in my mother, like she has just realized who this is, and she lets loose a quiet sigh and goes to him with open arms. Brian, taller by a few inches, keeps his head lifted, looking behind her at the wall. My mother stands with her back straight and her arms around him, holding him but not uncomfortable, the way boys are when they slow dance, all stiff. No boy has ever asked me to dance, but in gym class last year, old Miss Prescott put us in pairs and made us learn the waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Where's Mama? Brian asks, stepping back from her mother. We decided to wait and tell her tomorrow, she says, so she'll be surprised. Brian's disappointed. I was expecting to see her. Gus says he has to hit the road and slaps my brother on the back. I don't want Gus to go. His big, soft presence takes away some of the weirdness in the room. The gold beam of headlights drizzles through the windows as Gus backs out of the driveway. Then it's quiet again, all of us still and standing in the same place until Brian walks around us and goes into the living room. He looks up and down and around. Nothing's changed, he says. I've got a pot roast warming in the crock pot, my mother says. Brian sits at the table and our mother dishes an enormous helping of pot roast into a bowl and sets it in front of him. All of us in the kitchen together for the first time in 6 years. My parents are trying to make conversation and act like this is normal. The light over the stove gives off a yellow glow. We are in a dream, the three of us standing here, watching him eat, the rain falling. The air heavy and fragile, like at a funeral. And I guess that's what it is in a way. But because I think, just for a split second, that my brother has come back home to die. And then I'll just read one very short section from Brian's point of view. And Brian is kind of an amateur artist, and he brings his video camera home with him and records himself. And he uses the camera as a diary. And in this scene, Brian's been home for a couple of months. And this is a scene with his grandmother, who's sort of the one family member who has never expressed any kind of shame or embarrassment about him. And she's kind of the one who protects him and stands behind him. June 27th, 1986. Today, I was watching TV with my grandmother, and Tammy Faye Baker was on, singing about Jesus, and Mama looked at me. Honey, even if you don't go to church, God will listen to your prayers, she says. The clock is, grandfather clock's going off. I'll continue in 1 second. Okay. So as I said, I'm at VCCA in the library. So I'll start that scene again. June 27th, 1986. Today, I was watching TV with my grandmother, and Tammy Faye Baker was on, singing about Jesus, and Mama looked at me. Honey, even if you don't go to church, God will listen to your prayers, she says. Good Lord, was she telling me to get right with God? Does she worry I'm heading to hell? Tammy Faye doesn't seem to believe in a punishing kind of God, and I don't think my grandmother does either. As Tammy Faye blinked her mascara-thick lashes, I was reminded of drag queens I knew in New York. I wouldn't mind going to church with Tammy Faye, I said, especially if she'd let me do her makeup. Mama giggled. Big alligator tears started to run down Tammy Faye's glittery pink cheeks. Oh, there she goes. Anything can set her off, Mama said. When I was little, on Avon nights, we'd sit at the table and Mama would make lists of what she'd sold and what she needed to reorder. I'd help organize everything, lining up mascara wands, tubes of lipstick, flat pressed squares of eyeshadow, moisturizer that smelled like flowers, eye cream. I loved the dark green bottles of perfume, the elegant gold cases of rouge. My grandmother didn't care if my hands fluttered. She asked my opinions. She trusted my taste. I think Mama would love to see a drag queen. Sometimes I'd help friends with their makeup, but I only did drag a couple of times myself. I never performed or went out in public, didn't have the nerve or courage. But still, when I sat in front of a mirror and brushed on blush and eyeshadow glued on eyelashes, I felt a wild shock of delight. Boys came to me because I had the right touch. A few of them are dead, others sick, others infected. They were thrilled to be wearing makeup and sparkling gowns and wigs, and to be free from their father's disappointment and shame. They were so beautiful. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carter, for that lovely reading. It's so touching, and I look forward to speaking with you about it and asking some questions. Our second reader is Stephen Petro, and I would like to invite him to unmute himself and to read for us from his latest book.
Thank you, Isaac. And Carter, that really was beautiful and moving. As I've told you before, it's such a powerful book, and I'm so happy for all of the praise and awards that you've been getting, and that you get to be back at VCCA now. That's exciting. So I'm going to talk about my new book, which was written in most of it, I think, in W8, which is my favorite studio, and it is Stupid Things I Won't Do When I Get Old. And as Isaac said, it's a little bit of a manifesto and a little bit of a memoir about aging. And the way it came about was soon after I turned 50, my parents were in their 70s, and being kind of a smart-ass jerk, I started taking notes on what I was going to do better than they were when I got old. And that list sort of got longer and longer, and eventually became a New York Times column. And it had a lot of attention. And what really surprised me, though, was that 200 people sent me their own list. So there was like this whole band of people throughout the country. I call them, snitching and spying on their parents, but they're basically trying to hold themselves accountable, such as I was too. These were things that I was going to do when I got older that would presumably give me greater health, greater happiness, and longevity. And and I say that because there's studies that show when we have negative associations with aging, it affects our health and our mental health, and it actually shortens our life significantly, almost 7.5 years. So negative associations about aging are almost as dangerous as smoking these days. So there are sort of nearly 50 stupid things I won't do here that include: I won't limit myself to friends my own age. I won't join the organ recital, which is when everyone's talking about all their ailments. I won't hoard the butter pats, which is really about starting to let go of the things that we have at a certain point. And I won't be ordering the early bird special, because that is actually, while it's a great way to save money, it is an early sign of some medical problems, which I found in my research. But I am going to read a part of a chapter, I Won't Die Without Writing Letters to My Loved Ones. And Before I start that, though, I just want to acknowledge some of the people I see in the audience, both the Browns, David, Sarah, so many wonderful people and friends. So thank you all for being here, Christina, and really appreciate it. And of course, Kim and Sheila and Kevin, thank you for the support to this virtual program throughout the year. So I won't die without writing letters to my loved ones. My sister and I had just ordered lunch at a bright new restaurant in downtown Houston when she started to cry. This was just a few weeks after she'd learned of a recurrence of the ovarian cancer she'd been diagnosed with the year before. It was a few days before Christmas, and we had traveled to MD Anderson Cancer Center seeking a second opinion. In those intervening weeks, we'd also talked with her doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering, a team at Dana-Farber, and a solo researcher in the Bronx. For the first time in those weeks, we found a time just to be. And that's when Julie started to cry for the first time since getting this news. Do you think it's time for me to write letters to the girls, she asked, referring to her two daughters, my nieces. I knew the kinds of letters she meant. Only a few years earlier, my college friend Jacqueline Zinn had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. After 18 months of treatment, Jackie passed away at age 56, leaving behind a husband and 4 kids. The letters she left behind were thoughtful, touching, and memorable. Jackie and I had been classmates at Duke in the 70s and became friends again in the 2000s. We spent most Saturday mornings together at a spin class, racing against each other as though we were sister and brother. A triathlete, Jackie beat me 9 times out of 10 and always left the class on a high note exclaiming, "That was fabulous." Of course it was fabulous. She beat me and everybody else. Then one winter's day, when we were both planning to attend our 91-year-old friend Mary's funeral, Jackie absented herself. And less than a mile away at Duke Hospital, she learned about her diagnosis of glioblastoma. But despite the grim prognosis, Jackie, then 55, left no stone unturned in seeking a cure. Over the months, I watched Jackie succeeded in achieving remission and returned to spin. And then a few months later, the cancer returned, this time with a greater vengeance. Jackie was into the 2nd year of her illness when she, along with her husband, Doug, came to understand that the cancer would claim her life. Jackie asked her oncologist how long she had to live. He said, "I can't tell you. No one can ever know that." She pressed him further. "Weeks or months?" "Weeks," he replied. When Doug told me that, I thought, how many of us could be so brave to even ask that question? But it's what happened next that I found truly extraordinary. In facing her impending death, Jackie transformed what was already a profile in courage to a tale of determination I'd not personally witnessed before. As Doug explained to me a month after his wife died, once she understood the road ahead of her, she took charge of her future. She canceled her credit cards, gave her clothes to her sisters, and she taught me how to pay our bills. Once those tasks were done, Jackie, who had long been a project manager at GlaxoSmithKline, undertook her final effort. As Doug put it, her end-of-life experience was project managing her funeral. And in a series of meetings with her priest, Jackie planned her own service, choosing her favorite reflections, readings, and hymns. And at the service that day, I remember thumbing through the program and coming to an insert called Ingratitude. And the broadside began by giving thanks to Jackie's many caregivers. It was written in the first person, and I assumed that Doug, an accomplished writer himself, was its author. That is, until suddenly it became evident that the author's I was in fact Jackie herself. And in her valedictory to the rest of us, she ended with these lines: "I had a blessed and wonderful life. Of course, I would still love to be with you on earth, but that was not God's plan for me. I tried my hardest to beat this illness, but things are not always under our control. I hope I am now with my Heavenly Father and my dad, watching over all of you." And she ended it then, "Please go out and celebrate my life. It was fabulous." But then I heard about another end-of-life project that moved me even more. Doug told me every night for weeks she wrote letters to our children, multiple letters to be opened at different life milestones. Jackie wanted to be present with her kids, Doug explained, at each of those important moments, graduations, marriages, the births of what would have been her grandkids. Several years after Doug told me about the letters, in the wake of both my parents' deaths and when I started working on this book, I reached out to Jackie's second-born son, Jerry, who was writing about the loss of his mom, and I asked him if he would be willing to share those letters with me. Doug had already given him two, one soon after his mother's death and the other when Jerry graduated from college. Jerry will receive the third letter when he marries, and I have told him not to get married just to get the letter. He told me the letters my mother left me are among the most precious gifts I possess. She diligently took the time, the very limited time, as her life was coming to an end, to sit down and think about her children's futures. One day, in perfect cursive penmanship in blue ink, a month before her death, Jackie wrote her first letter to Jerry, then age 19. Dear Jerry, my budding filmmaker, I know you have a lot of emotions running through you, as I did when my father died. But I was much older than you at the time, so I really can't begin to truly comprehend what you were feeling. I'm so incredibly sorry that I had to die while you were so young, and I assume it sucks for you. Perhaps you can use some of these emotions and feelings in your upcoming works, assuming you continue to pursue film. Let me assure you that I did absolutely everything I could to stay alive for as long as possible. I know you realize that, having been with me at many of my treatments or tests, plus the acupuncture, tons of praying I also did. But for some reason, I just didn't make it as one of the chosen ones to be cured. But because of what I did, I'm sure I lived much longer than if I hadn't been in such good shape to begin with. I'm incredibly proud of you for everything you have done in your relatively short life. I will be watching over you every day to see what new and exciting things you will accomplish, regardless of what you do. I had many fantastic years on Earth, more than a lot of people, hence I have no complaints. I survived a melanoma, car accident in the mountains of West Virginia, and a car accident in Durham. So I've already lived many lives, and I was extremely grateful for each and every moment. Try and live your life that way, and you will be a happy and fulfilled human being. I love you more than you will ever know, my dearest Jerry. And then in Jackie's perfect penmanship, she wrote, love, Mom. So I will stop here for now. And Isaac, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that lovely reading and very, very, very touching. I had read it before, and of course, hearing it read by your voice is even more lovely.
Thank you.
So I think we need to, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, perhaps ask some questions and hear more from Carter and Stephen as they talk about this work and their other works. Again, as I mentioned, if you have any questions, please type them in to the comment section. I am reading them. There are a couple of questions already, but I guess I will use my privilege and start by asking a couple of sort of general questions. And let me start with Carter Sickles. Carter, tell me a little bit about the impetus for writing this book. Why did you need to write this book?
I do want to say, Stephen, that was such a beautiful piece that you wrote, very moving. So thank you. Really excited to read that. To read your book. Yeah, I think the impetus for this actually was kind of planted in my head when I was around Jess's age, around 14, and there was this special on Oprah Winfrey, which I used to watch after school, and it was about a gay man who was HIV positive, and he'd gone swimming in his hometown swimming pool in West Virginia. And I grew up in Ohio, in a rural town. And this was 1987, and when he got into the pool, everyone got out, and the mayor drained the pool, and he was barred from coming back. And Oprah took her show on the road to this small town in West Virginia, and it's such a kind of intense episode. You can catch like pieces of it online still, but the man, his name was Mike Sisko, sat on stage, and everyone in the audience was from his town. And there's this moment where a man stands up and says, AIDS is nature's way of eradicating gay men. And everybody in the audience applauds and claps. And I think I didn't understand like the shame and fear and all of that I felt that, but I didn't understand why. Because of course I had it come out, I didn't know anyone who was gay, let alone trans. And it really stuck with me. And I wanted, the clock's going off again, but I don't know, that story really stuck with me, and I wanted to write about the AIDS epidemic during the 80s and 90s and try to tell a version of that story and looking at it from the lens of like a queer man who's HIV positive and living in a small town. Because I feel like most of the stories we hear, rightly so, are about the urban areas. And I wanted to kind of give, I don't know, shine a light on, I think, many queer men who went back to these small towns for different reasons, and to write that story.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thank you. Sort of that your answer to that sort of brought something else to my mind, which I guess I'm going to put to Stephen. Stephen, I really like the juxtaposition of these two books together. Your book is about how to age with elegance and in good sense and with humor and taste. Whereas, of course, Carter's book is sort of about a forced crash landing into old age by people who should not have, and how they were treated. I'm wondering, being of a certain age, and you and me are not too far from each other of an age, and so having seen that in the 80s, having seen that, did that affect your book in the sense, did it maybe some of the impetus of your book was related to that topic? I don't know whether my question makes sense, but perhaps you can talk to us about it.
It definitely makes sense. And I don't usually read this chapter that I read tonight, but I wanted to read it in part along with Carter's work, because I was so moved by it, and I've told this to Carter before, that he really kind of takes it back to that period. It's almost like a documentary for me, the beginning to live through that. And I did my first book in the mid to late 80s, following people diagnosed with HIV/AIDS through the time they were diagnosed when they died. And several of them.
Stephen, I'm sorry to cut you off. You're having some static. I know we talked about, can you sort of mute and unmute yourself? Now unmute again, maybe.
Yeah, it seems that I'm having a little problem with the fan, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, no worries. Go ahead. It's much better now.
Yeah. So the story, and the main story in Carter's novel, really rang true to the oral histories of my first book, and and that I think that epidemic has stayed with every gay man who lived through it, and we are the fortunate ones in that regard, and so this gift of having a longer life, being alive, most definitely kind of comes out of that experience. And, so I think that's sort of as close as I can answer your question. That time was formative to how I see the world, and and with the good fortune that I feel for all of us who are here.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And Carter, Stephen was talking about sort of having a particular point of view because of having lived through those calamitous years. I guess somebody else in the audience asked this question, and I have the question. You wrote your book in multiple points of view. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened, why that happened? What do you think it adds to how we see the situation?
Sure. Yeah, I think that was David. Hi, David, and Hi, Sarah, Ma. It's great to see everybody here in the comments. Yeah, I mean, I wanted this to be, Brian's, this is Brian's story, and I wanted him to anchor the novel, but and really center the queer perspective. But I also wanted to present kind of a wider lens. And I think in some ways, like, Brian is kind of the emotional core, and it's his story, but his family members have to face these urgent questions about themselves. Like, are they going to change and evolve, or not? So I needed to move kind of outside of Brian in order to show that. I don't think that I could have shown the mother, for example. You didn't hear from her today, but Sharon, with as much kind of empathy and complexity, if I had only written from Brian's point of view. And then they also give you some insight into how the town is also reacting to Brian and the family. So yeah, I very much wanted to include these various, well, it's only three, well, I guess 4 points of view in the story, but still keep Brian at the center.
Yeah, and in fact, you said 3 and then you corrected yourself to 4. Yeah. And I know where the 4th comes in. Do you want to tell us anything about why it came in there and so forth?
Yeah, so the 3 points of view are Brian, his mother Sharon, and Jess, the little sister. And then of course the 4th sort of major character is the father. And you do get his point of view at the end. And that was a really, I mean, I wrote from Travis's point of view on my own, just kind of doing this sort of character work and figuring out who he was. But I did make that decision because I wanted the readers to kind of feel that he's sort of impenetrable to Brian and to his wife and daughter, like that, to feel that kind of silence and to not kind of give him the interiority that I give the other characters.
Right. And I just want to say that even when we were looking from the outside at certain characters, even that look was very instructive. For example, when I was reading the chapter's point of view of just the daughter, I was learning things about the mother Sharon that I would not have learned had we been inside her own mind, for a variety of reasons. But anyway. Now, earlier I just mentioned that I really like how the juxtaposition of these 2 books, but of course, Carter and Stephen, you have a different connection as well, which is Carter is the winner of the Stephen Petro LGBTQ Fellowship. And I guess I want to ask Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about it? How did that come about? Why did that come about?
Well, I'm really honored that Carter is this year's recipient. And I had not met Carter prior to the fellowship being awarded. But as a member of the board at VCCA, and it's an organization that has meant a lot to me for a long time now, one of the goals that we have is to really make VCCA a welcoming place. And that includes to all peoples, and in my case, especially for queer people. And we always talk about sort of the problem of the South, and the South perhaps rightfully having its reputation of being homophobic and transphobic compared to other parts of the country, a little dicey these days. So I established the fellowship to increase the number of queer writers, visual artists, and composers who come. Carter is the 4th, and it's an initiative that the board is trying to take across many different groups to bring in all sorts of people to sort of balance the whiteness of this gender that we see.
That's great.
I just wanted to say that I, thank Stephen for his generosity, and his VCCA is such a welcoming, open community, and I'm honored to win this award and to get this kind of recognition. So, thank you.
That's great. Carter, there was one question from Sarah. Since your previous book was converted to a movie, are there any hints of this one yet? I know it just, but
yeah. Hi, Sarah. No, not yet. So if anyone knows anybody, yeah, would love to make that happen. But
okay,
not so far.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Another question for you, Carter. You know, as I was reading the book, one of the things that I noticed was, again, how rich it was, and how you know, I got the sense as if that you were there. You know, you were there in the city of Chester. You were there in the middle of all of these things. The question is, were you there? Or was it research? Tell us more about that.
Well, I was there in rural Ohio, not Chester, but another town. And I grew up in the 80s. So a lot of it was kind of mining my own memories from that period, when I remember, as I was kind of saying with that Oprah special, but just the just blatant kind of homophobia and hate and fear toward queer people and around AIDS and HIV. So I had my kind of memories of that. And then, you know, and then I came of age and came out in college in the 90s. So I remembered it, but I also wasn't a part of it, right? And so I also did quite a bit of research, you know, watching films, documentaries, reading books like In the Band Played On, and other newspaper and magazine articles. My Own Country is a great book about what was going on in rural America in the 80s, and it takes place in East Tennessee, about HIV and AIDS crisis. So yeah, I did quite a bit of research, and some of it, of course, was very difficult and emotional and painful emotionally to do, but I wanted to get it right. You know, I felt like I wanted to do that for the book, of course, for the story, but also just like honoring all of these queer men, you know, mostly men, but queer people who died, you know, would have been in my life, or been my mentor. So yeah, I wanted to get as much of that right as I could.
And I get the sense you did. Again, it was the writing from the sentence level to any level was so visceral, so close. I was underlining stuff, you know, as I was reading them. So lovely. Stephen, we have a question for you from Ron, which is, as you were writing your book and you were sort of collecting all of these things, was there anything that really surprised you, shocked you, that you learned?
Well, hello, Ron. And Christina, thank you for your comment up there about my sister. Yeah, I've always, this is something that I've learned at VCCA. But there are two things. I remember when I was writing this book, I was lost in the middle. And I was explaining this to a visual artist, and I was kind of going on. And she said, "Oh, you're in the middle muddle. Like, it's this defined state of being." And I was like, "Yeah, that's it." And then I also learned that I had to get to the end of the story to really understand what my story was going to be, even as a journalist and as a nonfiction writer. So I got to the end of the first draft of this book, and it was kind of, and it was still close to when my parents died. It was kind of mean-spirited, and I had a lot of issues I was working out in that draft. And then I took some time and let time do some healing. And then when I did the second draft, I came to understand much more clearly that my parents had tried their level best to make the decisions that were going to work for them, and how challenging that is. And then as I passed 60 myself, I had to no longer just like be creating this list, but I had to start implementing the list. And that is much harder to do than it is to write about. So, all of that comes through, I hope, in the book and this book. That was really revelatory too.
Very good. Very good. By the way, Stephen, I read your book over a couple of weeks, and I must admit I did not read it in order. That is, I would open the beginning and I would like, what appeals to me. I know you had a bit of a structure, past, present, future, and obituary or something. How did you decide the structure within those parts? Was there, I felt like I could just jump around.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm glad you read it your own way. I'll tell you, it was one of the hardest aspects of this book, because I really created like a jigsaw puzzle with each of these chapters, and I tried putting them, in this framework and then in that framework, and they all seemed to work, and they all seemed, it almost seemed like I didn't need a framework, and I was going to do it without any sort of section heads. So it does have an arc in this form of stupid things I won't do now, stupid things I won't do tomorrow, and then stupid things at the end. So, but I think you can enjoy it anyway and take lessons from it. So I'm glad you did, Isaac.
Right. You may not believe this, but we have blown our time budget. But I'm not going to let you go yet without asking you, what are you working on now? Maybe, Stephen, you go first. Tell us a little bit.
Well, it's just us here, right? This is
sure.
Well, I am, I've written a lot about civility, and I did that TED Talk, and so I'm working on a proposal now that I call, the working title is Against Civility, but it's really how civility can be. I know we're having this talk, so I'll wrap it up. But how civility can challenge us to make progress in terms of social change. We can be too nice sometimes. We can be too decorous. And we have to remember that so much of the change that we see in the past, from the civil rights movement to the women's movement, came because people were uncivil. So it's not fully baked. It doesn't take the whole context of the political sphere into account yet, but that's something I'm working on.
Are you sort of looking for that sweet spot where, we are civil enough, but also are willing to push some boundaries a little bit?
I'm looking for that sweet spot. I'm looking at a balance left and right in this conversation too.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
That sounds fabulous. Carter, what about you? What are you working on?
Oh, well, I'm working on a new novel. It's very new. And today, I just spent all these hours in my studio here at VCCA kind of reading what I have already written. I started it maybe a year ago and then stopped and went back to it. And today I thought, I don't know. The whole thing is falling apart. And I don't know where it's going and what it's going to be. It feels really early, but I'll just say that it's going to be about two twin brothers, one who's trans and one who's not, who's cis, and their relationship.
Okay. Great. That's wonderful. We probably should stop now. Is there anything either one of you would like to add to our conversation? Anything you haven't talked about that you want to add?
I just want to thank Stephen again for the scholarship, and thank you, Isaac, for reading our work so closely and for these questions. Great to meet you. And for everybody who showed up tonight, thank you.
And thank you, Isaac. I have hosted. It takes some work, and Carter, it's a pleasure to share this stage with you. And thank you to the staff at VCCA for everything that you do. Much appreciated.
Thank you, gentlemen. Fabulous read. I'm looking forward to reading more of your works, and I want to thank everybody else for joining us, and for VCCA and Kim Doty, keeping us all in line and organized. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Good night.